Was the penalty to Lando Norris and Austin fair? We'll dive right into it right after we talk about Ferrari. Let's go. So, Ferrari, well, they were dominant during the race in Austin. It was amazing to see as a Ferrari fan. I absolutely loved it. But let's take things back to Friday. So, we've had the FP1. Ferrari wasn't dominant there. They were good. Not many conclusions can be drawn from FP1 in the sprint weekend. So I wasn't too excited about it. So we moved on to sprint quali. There we saw the Mercedes having pretty good pace. Russell actually was able to qualify second for the sprint. Lewis not that good. Only Verstappen was able to beat him. Going into the sprint race, it was clear that Verstappen would be able to clear Lando and George. But what happened later was that as the laps went by, the Ferrari was able to catch both the Mercedes of George Russell and the McLaren of Lando Norris. They clearly and quite easily passed George, and when it came to Lando, they only had time for one Ferrari to go by. And if they had one more lap, Charles would be able to clear Lando Norris too. But it was clear after the sprint that McLaren was behind Ferrari in terms of race pace and behind Red Bull too. And we didn't have enough laps in the sprint to understand if Red Bull and Ferrari had similar race pairs or one of them was better. Then we moved to the race where it became clear from the beginning that Ferrari had the better race pace of them all. So we had a very good start from both the Ferraris. They took advantage of Verstappen and Norris fighting, and then it came to the pit stops. There, Ferrari performed the perfect strategy, and they were able to have Sainz in front of Verstappen, which was great to see. So when it comes to Ferrari, we had a great start from both cars. Leclerc, first after turn 1, took off, never looked back. Sainz third after turn 1, fought with Verstappen a bit, then stayed a bit behind, but not way too far behind. Never in danger from the McLarens. The time for the pit stops came. He went for the undercut. It 100% worked. He was quite comfortably ahead of Verstappen when Verstappen pitted too. And Verstappen wasn't able to fight back. So perfect execution from Ferrari overall. Moving on, we have the biggest headline of the race, because even though Ferrari scored the 1-2 finish, I think that the most talked about thing would be the Norris versus Verstappen fight and whether Norris deserved the penalty or not. So what is happening is that for me it's tight. At the moment I was like, maybe Norris didn't deserve the penalty, but if I was Norris and McLaren I would give the place back because I wouldn't risk receiving a penalty, first of all. And second, he had the pace to pass him. Verstappen would make it difficult, but he had the pace to pass him, so it wasn't worth the risk. There weren't many laps anyway to open up a 5-second gap, even though he came quite close considering the laps he had. But it wasn't worth the risk. So do I think the penalty was fair? Well, honestly, as I said, my first opinion was that he shouldn't have received the penalty, but after rewatching it, Max was ahead on the apex, and even though they both went off, he passed Verstappen off the track. You cannot do that. Yeah, I mean, Max had the line. Yes, he went off, but he had the line, and you cannot pass someone off track. So, yeah, I think that it's 50-50, but maybe I'm leaning towards the penalty being fair. But the problem is that there were incidents during this race and the sprint race where the guy who pushed the other driver of track, received the penalty. I think the difference in those incidents was the fact that the guy that went off track didn't pass, the other one. Maybe if Lando Norris had stayed behind Verstappen, they could argue a penalty given to Verstappen. That could be a thing, but I'm not sure. So moving on, we have to talk about Mercedes and their upgrades for Austin. I think it was pretty clear that these upgrades are just useless. They started with the upgrades. George could do a few stuff, Lewis not so much. Then we've had the disqualification from Lewis in Q1. At that point, it was out in the media by George Russell that Lewis offered him his upgrades quite kindly, as he said. Then the race came. Um, George Russell, after his crash in Q3, changed a lot of things in the car that resulted in him starting from the pit lane, but with the Singapore spec, so no upgrades on. And we had Lewis starting on the grid from P19 with upgrades on. So I guess Mercedes saw that the upgrades don't work. That's why they changed it on George Russell. And even though Russell could start inside the top 10 with the upgrades and the fixed car after the crash, they opted to completely change everything, go to the old spec and starting from the pit lane. And they left Hamilton to start from P19 with the upgrades on. So if they saw that the upgrades don't work, they could do it on Hamilton too. They could switch to the old spec on Hamilton too, going from P19 to P20 or to the pit lane would be harmless. You're Mercedes after all, not a huge dominant force, but still among the top teams in a way. So they should have changed the car for Hamilton too. They did for George, because what we saw was that Hamilton didn't feel comfortable with that car at all, and he spun out of the race. Like Lewis spun and got stuck into the gravel. That's not what Lewis does. I think it's pretty obvious that that's not what Lewis does. It's not that he lost his talent. He has 2 wins this year. He has, proved that he's a very good driver in this bad car. And when this car continues not to work, I don't think it's Lewis's fault. And at the same time, we saw George Russell with the Singapore spec starting from the pit lane and finishing 6th above the Red Bull of Sergio Perez, who did not have a great quality for the race, but he still started inside the top 10. So we had George Russell finishing 6th ahead of Sergio Perez with the old spec and the 5-second penalty during the race. I think that proves that, the upgrades don't work at all. Maybe Hamilton wasn't so kind after he offered the upgrades to George Russell. He just knew what was coming. They definitely should have gone for the old spec for Hamilton too. Another thing to talk about is definitely the performance of Liam Lawson. This is his first race as a full-time Formula 1 driver, and boy did he perform. This guy had a conflict with Fernando Alonso during the weekend. He overcame it. He had all the haters behind his back because he replaced Daniel Ricciardo, one of the most beloved drivers on the grid in the entire F1 world. So he had to deal with this too. And what did this guy do? Starting from P19, because he had a 60 place grid penalty because of changes in the car, starting from P19, again I say, and finished 9th in the points. Can you grasp how important that is? And how amazing that is, considering he did it in the VCARB, like the Red Bull secondary team. This is great, amazing performance by Liam Lawson. He definitely helps himself in the contention between him and Tsunoda for the Red Bull seat in 2025, as Helmut Marko said. And since I mentioned Tsunoda, I want to talk about him. He is a favorite driver of mine. He is among my favorites. I just love him. I love his character. He has a good driving style. And I do believe that Red Bull doesn't give him enough recognition for what he has achieved and what he's doing on track and for their secondary team. His frustration was understandable when he ended up behind Lawson after the pit stops, but I think that he didn't help himself by being frustrated, and most importantly, he spun. So I'm really trying to support you, Yuki, but you're not helping me at times. Even though you have had a pretty decent season, this wasn't a strong performance of yours. Lawson did such a good drive. It doesn't look good for Yuki right now, but it's just one race. He will definitely come back, and maybe he will convince me to buy a VCARB Cup with a number 22 on. We'll see. And last but not least, I want to talk about Colapinto. What a driver he is. I mean, nobody expected him to drive that good, and he just did. He came into F1 out of nowhere. He replaced Sargent, who was doing very bad, and he really took the fight to Alex Albon. And now maybe this is how Alex Albon performs when he has a good driver next to him. Maybe Alex Albon isn't the wonder kid that everybody thinks that he is. Well, not kid, but you know what I mean. So I think it would be unfair if Colapinto doesn't get a seat for next season. The only seat available is the Sauber one, so I do think that he should be signed by Sauber next to Nico Hülkenberg. because they're talking about signing Bottas. It's a safe choice, it's a boring choice, and honestly, the car is bad. The Zauber car is bad, but it's not like Bottas is really making any difference. Bottas, who himself said that he's at the best part of his career and he hasn't never been better, but you can see it because the car is slow. But at the same point, even if you are on the worst car of the grid, the season is about to end. He should have had a few points, at least one. So keeping Bottas even for a year, not a good choice for me. Bring Colapinto in. He has proven that he can take everything out of the car, as Hulkenberg, who has been signed by Sauber already. So with Hulkenberg and Colapinto, they have two great drivers. Hulkenberg, who has proved that he can push a midfield team forward. He can get points out of a car that doesn't belong in points. And Colapinto, who is an exciting young talent, he has definitely the future in front of him, and he can definitely help this team forward. And maybe he can stay in the future when this team turns into Audi and starts performing. They will have a driver that they will know that he is good because he has proven it. But I'm gonna say a small but here because Colapinto has never driven under real pressure. Like, he came into Formula 1 and there were zero expectations for him. He could score 0 points and he would get a few well dones. So that's, the only but I'm gonna have on Colapinto. I want to see him how he will perform when he's under some pressure. Not a lot of pressure, some pressure. Because at the moment he's not driving under pressure. Although as he keeps performing, there will be a few expectations from him. So maybe last few races, 2 or 3, there will be a few expectations from him. He will be under some amount of pressure, and maybe by the end of the season we'll see exactly how good Colapinto is, and that would be a good thing because then it could be easier for Sauber to sign him, which I hope it will happen. So this is my reaction for the Austin Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed the video and see you at the next one.